The country's economic managers have decided to push through with the second tranche of oil excise tax increase next year as mandated by the train law. Finance Secretary Carlos Dominguez said the decision was made in light of a favorable outlook in world oil prices. The decision, though, will ultimately be up to the President, who this month had approved the economic team's recommendation to temporarily suspend the excise tax. Senator J.V. Ejercito urged the economic managers not to backpedal. He reminded them that the oil price increases had worsened the inflation rate caused by the first round of excise tax increases in January 2018. Senator Bam Aquino, meanwhile, asked Malacanang to heed the call of the people, not that of the DBM. To tell us more about this, we have Bim Santos live from the TV5 Media Center. Bim, so let's make this clear. It was on, then they recommended that we put it off. Now they're recommending that the next round of excise tax adjustment be on again.
Yes, so largely it's the main driver for this change in terms of policy, as mentioned by Finance Secretary Carlos Dominguez, was the downward trend in global oil prices. If you remember last month, oil prices have hit a high of about $86 per barrel. It ended the month averaging $79 per barrel. But just starting this month and just a few weeks recently, oil prices have continually gone down. Now they're just about a third of the cost last month. In fact, Dubai crude right now is averaging about $60 or $50 per barrel. And with this, with oil prices now on a downward trend, oil being a big input cost in terms of local commodities and other utilities, this has given the economic managers reason to call off this planned suspension.
Okay, so we are well below the $80 per barrel, but what happens now if it goes up again?
Finance Secretary Carlos Dominguez earlier during the press conference made mention of the quarterly review in terms of the implementation of the fuel excise tax. This is something that they also mentioned in previous interviews. He said that in terms of they would recommend to push through with the fuel excise tax, but this is something that they would review on a quarterly basis should prices of Dubai crude exceed again $80 per barrel. But although the big question here is how this would square with the train law, Republic Act 10963, since train law actually makes explicit that the period of review only covers 3 months prior to the next year's implementation, which is actually the fourth quarter, and that the DBCC may conduct a yearly review. So Secretary Dominguez said that they will come up by way of draft rules in terms of having a quarterly review, perhaps by way of a compromise.
Okay, but beyond the law itself, economists that we interviewed over the past few months said there was also an effect just by market expectation, just by the fact that they're expecting an adjustment, that they're expecting a new round of excise taxes and so on, that in itself is setting a mindset for people, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Bottom line, what does this mean for inflation?
Yes, Robbie, you're correct. A large part of the early announcement of the planned suspension was actually anchoring the public's inflation expectations. A large part of why inflation has accelerated for 9 straight months this year was a couple of sellers hiking the prices of their goods and services in anticipation of further increases in the cost of doing business. So a large part of the motivation behind the economic managers announcing their planned suspension was anchoring public expectations in terms of inflation. Now with this announcement, we could take this to mean signaling the economic managers' confidence that inflation has actually peaked by the third quarter of this year, in line with their earlier forecast. In fact, the BSP earlier today announced that their expected range for this month of November for inflation is about 5.8 to 6.6, which would start the first time, if it truly comes to pass, that inflation will be on a downward trend since the previous month's inflation number was 6.7%. Robbie?
Okay, in any case, it looks like we'll still be following the inflation story heading into 2019. Thank you, Bim Santos, for joining us in the big story.